Thank you for checking out Value Driven Life. I'm your host, Coach Chris McMahon, and I'm really well. Look, full transparency. My guest and I, we were just chatting before starting, and I just feel really, really lucky that over the last few months, maybe a year or so, uh, Jen Campbell and I have become just acquaintance, friends, and I'm gonna let Jen introduce herself, but I met Jen through Instagram, through the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a time in my career and my life when I was figuring things out. And I was reading a book. I was reading the anti-diet book. And uh, in posting that I was reading it, you just sent me a message and you were like, "Hey, what are your thoughts on this? Like, why are you reading this? What do you think about this?" And it was one of the first times that I had a conversation with someone via social media, where it was literally like it wasn't judgmental. It wasn't because they wanted something. It was because the person was curious and genuinely wanted to have a conversation. So, and you've been just gracious with your time, with answering questions, with helping me with my own carving out my own space in this crazy nutrition world. And I just, from the bottom of my heart, Jen, I truly appreciate you as a human and uh, the space you allow yourself to take up that you deserve to take up. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I feel the same way. I think I found you through Josh Hillis, and I enjoyed really enjoyed following you. And one of the reasons you stood out is because we seem to be having similar conversations, but I don't see many men having them, and that stood out to me. And you know, at Balance365, my business, we work with women or people who identify as women, and I'm we are asked constantly about resources for men, and that is like Balance365. And so we are happy to just have an open referral to you for those that we don't work with. And so when I found you, I just found it so interesting to follow and read your thoughts, and found you to be just extremely reflective. And yeah, when you posted about that book, I I wanted to know more. I was interested in your thoughts about it.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that for folks who haven't read the book. I can't even remember the author's name, but
Christy Harrison.
yes.
Yeah.
So basically, I like to, and I've talked about it many times on many episodes, but folks never probably need to hear it many times. Health is a spectrum, like
Mm-hmm.
everything's on a spectrum, and we have extreme diet culture, and then we have extreme anti-diet culture,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
you and I exist in the wonderful messy middle. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
really where we exist. And while that book did open my eyes to like a lot of things that maybe I hadn't thought about, like folks being able to be a certain size and still be healthy and really being aware of some of the discrimination that different
Mm-hmm.
individuals might face. It also made me rethink like, oh, am I hurting someone if I want to
Mm-hmm.
allow them, or not even allow, that's not even the right word. If I want to help guide them on their journey to weight loss, like it was really complicated. And the light that you were able to shine on it or set off a switch in my head made me be like, oh, yeah, that's just an extreme end of the spectrum. And while there are things you
Mm-hmm.
can pick from both ends, that's really what the messy middle is. Um,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I
yeah.
think this is where all good coaches are. And it's if you are a good professional coach who understands, self-determination theory, behavior change, etc., there's just nowhere else you can be, because people are going to people. And my job is to be, I guess what I feel a coach's job is to be sort of as unbiased as we can be, an unbiased resource and support, right? And that's how I feel about just my life goals, that I want my partner, my children, my family to feel that I am a safe place to land for anything that they are thinking about. And whether that's weight loss or changing a political ideology or, you know, whatever that may be, it's who I see myself as and my best self as. I'm not always in my best self area. But yeah, I just think we need more of that in this world, not less of that.
Yeah, and how does someone even begin to arrive at this point? Because I'm sure you didn't enter into the world of fitness necessarily saying, "Okay, this is me. I
Mhm.
know," right? This is an interesting thing that comes up with a lot of coaches that I know, myself personally, like you have to at one point you go either one end of the pendulum or the other end of the
Yeah,
pendulum in order
totally.
to find your way
Yes.
to this middle ground. How did you begin to navigate that or find yourself where you are right now?
I have been on both ends of the pendulum um, concerning weight loss. I have been where many of us have with like just, as a consumer, not as a coach, obsessed, disordered eating. Um, my life pretty much revolved around food fitness. I believe today that I barely got through my first year of university, barely have the grades to continue after first year. And I believe that is because of my disordered eating had become so extreme. Food is all I could think about. And it was just very hard to focus. So, it was, I think if more people were being honest about how far it goes, we'd be hearing lot, a lot worse stories out there, particularly from those working in the health and wellness industry, because often we're attracted to places that make our disordered thinking seem normal, right? To validate, not challenge. So and then I've been on the other end of basically very anti-weight loss on a soapbox of everybody just have to love their bodies. This is the solution. Stop with this. Anyone I saw who had any kind of dissatisfaction in their life with the way they ate, the way they moved, the way their body looked, I labeled it as disordered and thought they need help. They just need to love themselves more. And now I just see how those were two ends of a spectrum, and I a lot of it coming from my own hurt, right? Both of those ends were coming from my own hurt and healing process, I guess. And how did I find my way to the middle? That was your original question. Is that honestly, I think a lot of this comes from number one, I having my own autonomous decision making questioned, and sometimes in very rude ways. And I had that questioned when I was on both ends of the spectrum. Now, the most recent one was kind of being in those anti weight loss communities, which I think have a place in the world. I think there needs to be spaces for people who are healing or just for whatever reason do not want to be in weight loss environments. We need those spaces. But I was in those spaces for a long time, and I didn't realize, I really wasn't aware of, you know, movements behind them and what they truly deeply meant and who they were meant for. I reached a point in my journey where I had become quite peaceful with myself, and developed quite a healthy relationship with food and my body. And one day I decided that I did have a weight loss goal, and I was feeling extremely uncomfortable in my body. I had put on So here I had 3 babies in 4 years, and I had done my pendulum swing through that time, and had also put on quite a bit of weight in that journey, as many people do, with the other end of the spectrum of food freedom. And I was just feeling so uncomfortable in my body, and my body really hadn't felt like it belonged to me in many years because of pregnancy, giving birth, and breastfeeding. And I just realized one day that it would feel really good to me to what felt like to me reclaiming ownership of my body. And I did. And that for me involved some body composition changes to feel more at home in my body. And when I expressed that desire to, the network I had built, it was really poorly received. And, my feelings were hurt. I felt like my whole life it was people telling me what to do with my body. And now I was in this very healed place, and I was still being told what was right and wrong. And that, really triggered that inner perfectionist in me, that inner people pleaser, that inner desire to always be looking for a place that I could fit in, right? Not belong. But it was just, it actually, I would say, being poorly received, it unlocked another layer for me to, there was an opportunity there to choose to do what others thought was right for me, or I could choose to do what I felt was right for me and have my own back. And I thought I didn't come this far to now just jump into another camp and do some and agree and go along with something that doesn't feel right to me in order to feel like I belong, not truly belong, but feel like I belong. And so I chose me. And, this was like the olden days of 2013, 2014. And there weren't messy middle spaces like there are now. I would say even back then, we were still very steeped in diet culture, mostly. Even those sort of anti-weight loss spaces were rare back then as well, where now I think it's quite easy to find them. And so I just logged off social media and did it on my own. And, still just a consumer of health and wellness. I have a finance degree. I worked in marketing for a long time as well, digital marketing. And it really wasn't until I met Annie that I realized that I could become a creator in this space. And so that's what I did. I provided the space that I needed when I was trying to figure this all out.
And for folks who don't know, Annie is you both together created Balance365.
Yeah, yes.
So know who she is. I will also probably link to her in the show notes just so folks can see the amazing.
Yeah, she's wonderful. And she is, we just have such closely aligned value systems in this area. Annie was a size 24 and she's now a size 12. And those are numbers I could throw out at you that sounds amazing, but like the journey for her, and the belief system that changed, and all the things which you could have Annie on to talk about that with.
Yeah.
Her and I are we've both been on two ends of an extreme, and we are just so passionate about protecting people's autonomous decisions for themselves, right? Like I don't have an agenda. I don't care if people want to change their bodies or not. I don't care if people want to change their nutrition habits or not. I don't care if people want to be healthy or not. That's their business. But if they communicate to me what their needs are, then I am right beside them, helping them to go get it.
I think that it's really interesting. Something that you brought up, Jen, was this idea that, suddenly this identity that had been created for you via the internet, via your blog, via all these things, seemed shaken up because you wanted to do something that was slightly different. And it's almost as if in that moment, what it can feel like, because I've experienced this, and I don't know if you have or if this is on the nose or not, but it feels like almost your character is called into question because you're actually listening to something that's of value to you. And that challenges in many ways, challenges your identity, challenges the choices that you're making,
Mhm.
and that like you keep bringing up autonomy like that. When we lose our autonomy, we lose our sense of self, and
Mhm.
that's such a scary experience, and to feel
Mhm.
alone in that experience. And I don't know, does that sound like a little bit of what that feeling felt like?
Yeah, and I did feel alone for a long time, and that wouldn't be okay for some people. But it was preferable for me to be alone than to try to be somebody who I wasn't. And I spent, the first 3 decades of my life trying to be somebody I wasn't to make other people happy and comfortable. And that impacted everything for me. I did feel like a shell of a person after I had had my children. Um, I was going through so much and realizing the heart of the issue for me was largely that I didn't know who I was. I truly didn't know myself. I only had knew this version of myself that like I just constantly ruminated on being liked and needing people to like me, from my own parents to my in-laws, my husband's parents, to any type of authority figure, teachers, professors. I just jumped through hoops for 30 years and I was exhausted. And realizing the core of so much of my I guess like emotional wellness distress was not showing up as myself, it became incredibly important to me. And I would rather be alone than acting.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And I think, it just speaks to the level of self-awareness you have. I think I think what happens, at least to the folks that I've worked with, and maybe it's happened to the folks you've worked with at Balance 365, is that it's really easy to think that if we hit a specific thing, or if we have this thing we identify with, then it will fix everything,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And sometimes when that happens, it's just this, it's almost like a cosmic shift when we're like, "Oh, wait a
Mhm,
minute. Nothing is
mhm,
actually changing." Like, yes, maybe my body is changing. Maybe I am losing weight, but the thing that I'm actually discovering is that I can have self-efficacy. I
mhm,
can be consistent when I need to be consistent and continue to go if I enjoy myself too.
mhm,
Like
mhm.
it's like this level of freedom that I think sometimes people are almost, they don't they don't trust themselves, and developing trust in yourself requires work. It
Yeah,
requires making a lot of mistakes that are okay
absolutely.
because 'cause you're human, you know? I don't know. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I do feel that way. I think in Balance 365, we do these member spotlights on our podcast. And I think every single woman that we have interviewed has said, like, I lost weight with Balance 365, but that was just like icing on the cake or byproduct, or it was the least important thing of my journey.
Mm,
And what they're most excited to talk about is the woman they became in the process, living a values driven life, having a clear vision for themselves, building trust with themselves, becoming a woman who keeps commitments to herself. Those are all those are all the big wins that women get in Balance 365.
yeah, I think it's so important to feel supported. Like, I
Mhm.
think it's important to feel supported, even if that support is self-support. I
Yes,
don't know if
yes.
there's
Oh my
a better
gosh,
term for
Chris.
that,
Yes.
right? Is there a better term
Yeah.
for that? Self-support?
Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
think it's a self-trust, self-support. It's like, I call it having my own back.
Mm,
And I can't control others. I can't control what they're going through, what their journeys are. Those are things out of my control. I can control how I treat myself and how I show up for myself, how I think about myself, how I feel about myself, if I'm kind to myself. Like those are the things I can control. And so imagine going through your life and relying on feedback from others in order to value yourself. Just imagine, like I can be okay if like I can think I'm attractive if my husband thinks I'm attractive. I can think I'm a good wife if my in-laws think I'm a good wife to their son. I can be a good writer if my professor gives me an A plus and good feedback on all my writing. Like it's just a constant pursuit of outsourcing your value, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And I have value because I say I have value.
Hmm.
And nobody can take that away from me. Professors can take away their approval. Parents can take away their approval. In-laws can take away their approval. I will never take away my own approval of me. And that's the relationship I built. I won't say that was step one. I didn't go from here to there in one leap. That's where I am today. And
Yeah.
now look, my business could fail and I still approve of me. My husband can be upset with me and I still approve of me. I can, my parents can not be speaking to me and I still approve of me,
Yeah, I do know. And as one who's in therapy, and I have been for a long time, usually when I come to a roadblock or a story or whatever I'm trying to deal with or process, the thing that the thing that my therapist, shout out to Sheba, the thing that she usually says to me is okay, what are you actually looking for in this situation? Like, what do you want? And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, well, I want that. She's like, so you want them to approve of you? Does that
Mm-hmm.
actually, is that actually in alignment with what's important to you? And then I have to stop and say, you know what? It's not. That's not what's important to me. It's me being able to actually see something, right? Because if we look at weight loss, it's usually like, if I see the number on the scale, then I know that I'm definitely doing all the right things.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at parenting, if my son gets into the best school, then I know clearly he worked hard, but it's because I
Mm-hmm.
did X or Y, or they did X or Y, right? It's it's putting onus on someone else to determine if I'm actually doing any of the right things.
Yeah,
And
go ahead.
yeah, no,
Well,
no, no.
I deal with anxiety like all the time. And I also am in therapy. Shout out to my therapist, Karina. Um, Whenever we sit down to chat, I keep those appointments. It's such a privilege to have access to therapy. I'll say that first, but I keep those appointments no matter what's going on in my life. So one thing I committed to actually in January was to proactively go to therapy, no more reactively. You know, I used to I'd go to therapy for a while and I'd start feeling better. And then I'd go, okay, I think I'm good. And I did that for years. And it was helpful, of course. It got me through some hard periods, but I reached a point this past fall. I was struggling again and thinking about going back to therapy. And I thought, no more, no more quitting when you feel good. It's time to you meet with your therapist every second week, every second Thursday, her and I meet. And, sometimes it's once a month if one of us is on holidays, and that's okay too. But consistency, right? And so I always have something to talk to her about. And I'm learning more about myself now that I'm going proactively rather than just in these emergency situations, because we're digging into more granular things that I think about on a day-to-day basis. And one of them, and it's not an emergency, but it significantly impacts my life to have just an edge of anxiety on me at all times. And we dig into what that's about. And it's almost always, the heart of it is almost always when I'm outsourcing my value or approval to somebody else. And it shows up for me. It's interesting that you mentioned your son getting into this school. I think unpacking our parenting journeys, this is the thing for anyone listening, whether you have children or not. For me, having children has been one of the most triggering, trajectory changing points of my life. It's been like putting up a mirror to all my own issues. And because I want to be a great mom that my children see as, safe and stable and consistent, I will do this work. And so much comes up for me in therapy around parenting. And so much comes up for me around trying to control who my children are becoming, because I believe the world is judging me based on who my kids become. And isn't that profound?
It is. It's very profound. My son is so young. He's 2.
Mm-hmm.
And, this comes up a lot. I'm trying not to be biased when I say that he is smart, and I don't know why he is that way. My wife likes to be very kind. My wife likes to be very kind and say it comes from me. But I grew up in a house where my parents, neither one of them went to college. And academics, I could come right, and a lot of OCD and anxiety and low fear, or I start to fear that if he gets praise or too much awareness of his intelligence, that he could wind up like me.
Right.
And then my wife, who is so kind and gentle and patient, reminds me that, well, no, we talk to him about what we're feeling and what he's feeling, and give him the space to have big feelings, and we don't celebrate him for getting, maybe being able to spell all these words and know how to count to 35 and know how to count in Italian because he's 2. Like, we don't celebrate that. It's the fact that he's just trying. That's really like what we. Oh, you're trying that. That's so cool. Like,
no matter what the outcome
let's
is.
try, right? And that, I think, is just. It's so interesting.
It's just a shift. It's a total shift. Yeah. Because look, like, we live in, as far as our work in health and wellness, we live in a culture that's obsessed with a weight loss results, number on the scale. But many of us grew up in homes, schools, cultures that praise results. And the result is what determines what your effort was. And the result is what determines even your value as a human. And that's so problematic. We see it. Like, if you are a coach in this industry, you see the problematic issues with being results oriented. It is more harmful than helpful in most cases. And of course, there's room for messy here. There's room to be in the messy middle and say, yes, we can celebrate results, but it comes from the effort in the process. And can we still be proud of ourselves for the effort we put in, even when we're getting maybe a result that we had hoped would be different, or a result that is not as quote unquote good as what another person is getting? Can we? Right? And so it is a total shift. My husband and I are trying really hard. He was born in the 70s. I was born in the 80s. I think you were born in the 90s, weren't you, Chris?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is like, my husband to you, born in the 70s, born in the 90s, just, it's very ingrained for him. So yeah. We're, and we slip up, but we are really trying to praise effort over outcome because we see how problematic it is, how problematic it's been for me and my husband. But then also, we've got 3 children with very different abilities. And we have one son who his teacher tells me he is the hardest working child in her class. And he works twice as hard to get half the result of his older brother. His older brother has incredible grades for somebody who tries as little as possible to get them. And so we even see what that creates in our family dynamic to be praising results, right? And as a coach, who's worked with thousands of women, and if I apply what I have learned as a coach to raising my children, my worry is not for my son who puts in the effort and enjoys the process and does it anyways, even without the result that his brother is getting. My worry is for my older son who puts in as little effort as possible and is praised for it by our society because he gets good grades. My worry is for him and how hard life is going to hit him later on when things don't come so easy to him. He doesn't know, he's not used to applying his foot to the gas. It'll feel pretty heavy when it has to happen.
Because it's so interesting that you bring that up, because I reflect on who I surrounded myself with growing up. And all of my friends were far more intelligent than me. And it made me upset that I couldn't grasp or do what they were doing at the rate they were doing it. But now, like, looking at it, it's like, oh no, my mind just worked differently than them. Totally. I'm a creative individual. Being in a classroom all the time, I would pass tests because I can memorize a textbook page, because I can memorize text because I was acting. So it's like, that doesn't mean that just means my brain just works different than other people. And then when I got to college, it was a completely different thing. And those people who were way smarter than me, but maybe didn't have to try as hard, really had a hard time at university. Yeah. Because it was like, okay, now I have to crack open this textbook, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's just this really interesting dynamic that we can witness as we're trying to learn from our own choices and see how that shapes what our kids are doing too. I just find it fascinating. I find it, I have more gray hair now than I used to, it's just like, and he's only 2. So I imagine having 3, that's having like 5,000 children. I don't even know where to begin with that. I don't even know where that begins. Like, it's just fascinating to hear you talk about that, Jen.
I would say when my son was 2, I followed him around the playground trying to make sure he doesn't fall off a slide or doing things that are dangerous beyond his capability and watching him get physically hurt. Now I have an 8, 10, and 12-year-old about to be 9, 11, and 13. And now I want to follow my 13-year-old around the world and make sure he doesn't fall off emotional ledges. It really changes from their physical safety to their emotional well-being. And I'm not sure my husband and I were aware enough with our first 2 of aware of emotional wellness. We feel like we just reclaimed our own in the last few years here, but to set our kids up for success in this very challenging period. So I applaud you and your wife. I think you 2 are just incredible. I can't wait to meet your wife someday, by the way.
Oh, she is. You know what? Right now, as we speak, she is in Italy visiting her sister.
Oh my God.
Her sister studies in Italy. She is getting her master's degree there in culinary arts.
Wow.
So my sister, and for folks listening to the podcast and stuff, when COVID happened, our entire world shut down. Everyone's world shut down. But for my wife and I, she had our son. She was diagnosed COVID positive when she delivered our son. It was like it was April of 2020. So like, no one knew what was going on. We were shunned. And then the first 2 weeks of my son's life, my wife couldn't touch him. and I was doing
Wow.
everything. And
Wow.
for my wife, and she's talked about this, it shaped a lot of the decisions that we made because one, because I'm immune compromised because I'm type 1 diabetic, my wife feared
Mm,
me getting sick. Two, she feared getting sick, not being able to be around our son. And three, we feared my son getting it and he'd be fine, but he'd give it to me. So it's really like our world, our bubble is still really small. And he's actually getting the vaccine next week. So we're really, really excited. But
wow. Wow.
my wife, she would go to school and teach and wear all these masks and glasses and all this stuff to keep herself safe, but also to keep me safe and our son safe. And school ended, and she's like, "Can I want to go see my sister. I haven't seen her in over a year." And I was like, "Go do it. Go."
Mm,
She's like, "You're gonna be with TJ." I was like, "Okay, go do it. Go
mhm.
see your sister. Go have this time. Go spend this time." And I just think it's so important because of how the world is right now, even the last few weeks with everything going on, for them to have that time. And for
Yeah,
me
that's
not to be
beautiful.
the reason she doesn't get that time. You know,
Mhm.
I don't know. I just find it interesting. Um
Well, and how you
for her.
support each other, right? And what your son, back to what I was saying, how you two are raising your son, not just how you're raising him, but for him, the marital dynamic that he sees in that you two live just very intentional, values driven lives and have an intentional, values driven marriage that supports you as individuals and as a couple. You know, your son is seeing this. And I don't think I think my kids are seeing it now, and of course, it's never too late. But I don't think my kids had that foundation where I'm probably more worried about my oldest's emotional wellness, which I think any parent of teenagers, no matter what you do, I think emotional wellness through those teen years is just very scary. I don't think we prepared him for these years as well as we could. He's a little more, who's to say if it's us or, some genetic code he has or but he's just a little more closed. He's not overly vulnerable in any way. He keeps things in. I'm sure it's tricky, but yeah, definitely as your kids get older, your worries your worries for them shift for sure.
Yeah. I just I don't know, Jen. I there's so much I actually want to talk about because, prior to recording we were talking about what's going on in the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
And for folks, it depends on when this episode comes out. In the United States, we're talking about the ruling with Roe versus Wade,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a very it's a very multi-layered conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But in us talking about our families and our kids, and me sitting here listening to you talk about autonomy and talk about your sense of self, I just know that there's so much going on and
Mm-hmm.
so much to be able to deal with. But you're raising three boys.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I, we're trying our hardest with this young little, hopefully unbreakable human,
Mm-hmm.
to raise him to be better than I was, to
Mm-hmm.
be better than our parents were. And a
Mm-hmm.
better is, I guess, a relative term. But I mean to have their own level of awareness to be able to support and provide the space for someone to be able to have what they need
Mhm,
within
mhm,
their life. And I don't know how is that, affected this this part of this dynamic, this part of your world, because it's very apparent now. Um,
mm.
I don't know. Do you feel comfortable talking about that? Does that
Yeah, sure. So raising three boys in this period of time, overcoming, the disordered eating, the internalized, well, I don't know if you ever overcome internalized misogyny or if you just continue to unpack it. And my husband doing very similar work as well. And, while raising 3 boys, it's interesting and hard. It's more complicated. And there's a lot of pausing, and there's a lot of not doing things right. And I think I also have to trust that, here's a fact. I'm not going to do everything right. And my husband's not going to do everything right. And another fact is that there are things that we maybe have done or will do in the future that cause our kids trauma. And my parents caused me trauma, and their parents caused them trauma. And I wish I could say, I promise you, Chris, I will never cause my children any hardship or trauma, but I will. And so there's this piece of self-compassion I have discovered in the last 5 years. And this is like unpacking your perfectionism. For anyone listening, like, perfectionism is prevalent and debilitating. And I think, as I have, tried or unpacked my own trauma and tried to engage my parents in conversations that would have been very healing for me, and been met with, closed doors in some cases, I think my own parents just can't face their own imperfections. They can't face it. They have so much shame, actually, that it would bring them to their knees to have to face those things. And that's okay. I accept that. I accept it. And I will continue to do my work. What I will do different, if we want to talk about better, or there might be a better word for it, but
Yeah.
is just an acceptance of imperfection, and that I choose to love and accept my whole self, who makes mistakes. And I, in the process of doing that, I have been better able to love and accept my husband for his whole self, even though he has a side of him that he wishes wasn't there, but it is. But he has to love and accept mine as well. It doesn't mean we're not working on ourselves. It's just that we choose to love and accept the darker sides of each other. And I choose to love and accept my children wholly for who they are. And in this process of raising 3 children, I will remain open-hearted around helping my children at some point in the future process any harm I have done to them. And I can do that because I love myself, and I will make mistakes, and I am willing to face those mistakes. And I think of the conversations I've tried to have with my parents, and just the hurt, it's more hurtful to have that hurt denied, I think, than the hurt in the first place in some cases. And I think that I won't deny the hurt. I will say, like, I see you and I understand, and I'm sorry. We didn't get that right, and I am sorry. And that's all people need, I think. And so raising boys in this time, do I have the answers? Does anyone? Like, this is hard. This is really hard. And maybe we're not getting it right. But I think I am doing my best with the information I have, and my own, emotional capacity to mature. I'm still maturing, I say, and evolve. I wasn't a mature person when I had children. I was 25 when I had my first, and 29 when I had my third. And I really didn't have my trajectory changing shift until I was 30. And that will just be ever evolving until I die. And so my kids aren't getting the best version of me, I don't think. I think that woman's in the future. But I hope I hope they're getting a humble version of me. And already in my day-to-day, I practice apologizing to my kids, right? That one small, subtle shift of, hey, I'm an adult human and I'm not always right. I'm an adult
Mm.
human. I am your parent, and I can cause you harm sometimes. I get emotionally dysregulated. I don't deal with my emotions well, and I take it out on others around me, and that's not fair. I am sorry. And my just my kids seeing that and seeing me in the process of evolution, I hope they will remember those moments when they need to be in the process of theirs.
I think they will.
I
Like
hope so.
because if I look back on my relationship with my parents, the moments that I actually remember the most are when I saw them the most vulnerable,
Mhm.
even if it wasn't a shining moment for them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like I can recall, like I can close my eyes and I can see moments and being vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean crying, but I can recall moments seeing my mother cry or my
Mhm.
father get choked up and they're of the generation from like the 50s where we don't talk about that. Like if
Mhm.
that's happening,
Mhm.
something must be happening. And those are the
Mhm.
moments that stand out to me because those are the opportunities or the moments that I'm curious about. Like I want to
Mhm.
ask about that. So you being able to be like, "Hey, I'm feeling this way right now and this is how I'm responding with it." Like they will remember that. There's
Mhm.
no doubt in my mind that they will. How they use that, couldn't tell you, but they'll remember it because I remember that and seeing my own father. I can remember being diagnosed with diabetes and being home from the first week. Like I was in the hospital for like a week, and I can remember being home with my father, and he took off work and he watched me because I wasn't
Mhm.
allowed to go back to school yet because I was taking insulin shots and the school didn't have anyone who was diabetic. It was this whole thing. So I remember sitting with my dad watching Unsolved Mysteries because that was my favorite show when I was like 10.
I might too.
Yeah, Homesick Robert Stack on Unsolved Mysteries on Lifetime, and Golden Girls would be on before. I remember just sitting there and watching it. My dad being like, "What? Why is this kid a retired like 65-year-old female?" But he made me like an omelet, and we sat there. And when I got to be around that age, I never would like. My dad and I didn't hug very often. We didn't cuddle or do any of those things I see myself doing with my son now. But I laid and I remember I put my head on his stomach and I just remember asking him like, is am I going to be okay? Like, am I going to die from this? Because
Mm.
that's like a thing like a 10-year-old thinks of or younger because it's a disease you'll have for your whole life,
Mhm.
and my dad, I just remember him like choking up and welling up and not having the answer, and he immediately shoved it down and didn't he was like, "You're gonna be fine." I was like,
Mhm.
you know, I still remember that. And this is the same man who, when I saw him like 2 weeks ago, he looked incredibly old to me.
Mm.
Like he
Gosh.
incredibly old. He's in his 70s. He looked like he was in his 80s.
Mhm.
We live hundreds of miles apart now, so I don't see him as often. And when I hugged him goodbye, I tried to hug him longer because I don't know how often I'm going to. I don't know
Mhm.
how many more trips there are where I
Mhm.
where I see him. I don't. And I hugged him a little longer, and he didn't know what to do, and he pushed me away because he just doesn't
Mhm.
know. He doesn't know what to do with that. So it's like I see all of that, and I hear you describing what you do with your own sons, and I'm telling you, they're gonna remember it. They're gonna be good people, good
Mhm.
humans. They are.
He's
Even if they make mistakes, they still will be.
it's funny thinking about these older men. One thing I remember, so my husband's dad, um he's an old rancher from Alberta, Canada. And he is just, sun weathered. He's in his 70s. He talks like a cowboy. He looks like a cowboy. He has a big white beard. He's extremely conservative. but also progressive in many ways, but political ideology conservative. And, I remember for a long time wanting to put him in a box of here's who he is. And this is why, kind of unpacking values and being careful of biases and being careful of labels of people. I will never forget. My husband and I weren't married even at this time. We arrived at his parents' farm I don't know, it might have been my first or even second meeting of his parents. And his dad is so affectionate. And he gave him a kiss on the lips. And it's like at that time, my 30-year-old boyfriend and this old cowboy. And I just was so moved by it. And my own father, who I see as, more progressive than my husband's dad, also a farmer, but more progressive. Him and my brother do not have that. There is just a stoicism there. And I'm also very curious like you, and I love wondering about people. And I love wondering about my husband's dad because I really want to put him in a box. And he's just not in that box. He is a multi-dimensional person, as we all are. And there's evidence of that all around us, which is why, back to when we opened this podcast, all of these little moments for me, I've learned just how incredibly important it is to center a person's autonomy and check in with what people need, because we are all just so different. And we live in a world where we want to draw a line in the sand and say, here's the good people and here's the bad people. And I've also found myself devastated when I've done this and one of the good people has a value that I don't maybe agree with, or taking an action that I wouldn't. It's devastating. And you realize you put the good people on a pedestal as well. And then the bad people surprise you by giving their sons kisses on the lips.
Right?
So, wait a second.
Wait a second. I absolutely love that story. And Jen, I think you're such a unique individual in the fact that you can openly admit like how you feel on specific topics. And regardless of what the world tells you sometimes, that is so important and so valued and will be valued from now until the end of whenever this world stops spinning, because not enough people are fully transparent. There's a time and a place for everything, but that is just so important. So, Jen, if folks wanted to work with you or learn more about what Balance365 is, what would be the best bet? I know you guys just had a big sale, and I know you let people in at different times. So
they can find out more at balance365.com. We have a coaching program that opens up 3 times per year, and the purpose behind that is, number one, when people find us, we're usually not opening for some time. So it gives them some time to really think about it and not impulsively, how many programs or coaching programs or things have you impulsively bought that you think are going to help you and then just sit and collect dust on the shelf? So it gives them some time to think if they are ready, willing, and able to do this work with us. And it also allows us to onboard people as a community rather than individuals kind of just, it's like this is a community and we're all at the same place. So we open our coaching program 3 times a year at balance365.com. You can get on the wait list. But we do have some programs for people who are just dipping their toe in the water. We have an emotional eating workshop, and we have a fat loss foundations workshop. as well. And, Chris and I just had this really deep talk. But to be honest, who you are and what you value is laced throughout all of our programming, all of it, because that is the important part.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with every single thing you just said. And I am thrilled when folks, it's funny because folks will follow me on Instagram, or a couple of people like subscribe to my email list, and they'll hit reply and they'll send me a message and they'll be like, I heard you on Balance365's podcast. Like, or I'm working, or I'm a member of Balance365, and I just, and I automatically just know they're in such capable hands. Such, just, yeah, that's just like the best word for it. It's just capable and gentle and supportive and full of compassion and self-compassion. There's just so many words and adjectives to describe what you guys do. And yeah, I just really, really, really appreciate you making time in your schedule to come on the show.
Oh, thank you. We loved having you on. And for anyone listening, if you haven't heard Chris on our podcast talking about men and body image, it was an incredible conversation, and we could have jammed for hours, I'm sure. And so, yeah, I just really appreciate you, and I love what you're doing here, Chris. And I think the world is better because you're in it.
Well, thank you. Folks, if you're catching this podcast because you're a huge fan of Balance365 and Jen, I really appreciate you being here. If you could leave a review, I'd love it. I'd read them. I cherish them, but it helps other people be able to hear the episode. And if you go back and check through the episode library, I have a lot at this point with some interesting folks and shorter episodes that are like 5 minutes long, breaking down complicated nutrition topics in bite-sized ways. So check those out. And thank you again, Jen, and everyone else. Go do great things because you can.
Thank you, Chris.